Hi, everyone, and welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. Today's Café IBTTA is part of IBTTA's Diversity Speaker Series, virtual programming built on open conversations with leaders at the forefront of creating equal opportunity in transportation. My guest today is April Rai, President and CEO of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, also known as COMTO, a role she assumed in December of last year. COMTO is the leading national advocate for employment diversity, inclusion, and contracting opportunities in the transportation industry. Its mission is to eliminate barriers to maximum participation for minority individuals, veterans, people with disabilities, and certified MWDBE businesses through leadership training, professional development, scholarship and internship funding, political advocacy, partnership building, and networking opportunities. Before joining COMTO, April served as Deputy Executive Director for the Women's Transportation Seminar International, or WTS. Before that, April served as CEO of the National Organization for Youth Safety, a coalition of youth-serving organizations and government agencies working together to address health and safety issues that affect youth in the United States. April, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Pat, for having me and inviting me. It's great to be here.
Well, this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and we talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And we are taking your questions and comments, and we want to get started right away. Secretary Pete Buttigieg addressed the COMTO leadership in 2020 and called COMTO the voice for equity in transportation. Therefore, in the chat function, please type a word or phrase that expresses your thoughts or feelings about what equity in transportation means to you. Type something in the chat about what equity in transportation means to you.
I'm going to type something too, Pat.
All right.
Just to get it.
All right. Representation, access for all, inclusion, non-preferential, fairness, fair representation, fairness, access, good stuff.
Transparency.
Yeah, okay. Health. We'll talk about that, the connection between transportation and health.
Access to jobs. That's exactly right. Transportation being a connector.
Beautiful. April, any initial thoughts about the words people are typing in? This look good to you?
This could be a word cloud for COMTO.
Yeah.
I love it. We could just put all these words into a word cloud and it could become the COMTO word cloud. I love it. This is excellent.
Well, April, for our viewers who may not be familiar with COMTO, why don't you tell us a little bit about COMTO, its mission, and your scope of work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. COMTO simply wants the face of transportation to reflect the community served in a nutshell. And we believe that diversity really moves the world. And the leadership of transportation, as I was mentioning, that is the great connector, connecting people to opportunities and employment and life. It really should reflect the diversity of those served. And that includes not only ethnic diversity, because that's the first thing people think of when they hear the word minority, but also gender diversity, age diversity, ability diversity, and generally diversity in lived experience. This is Pride Month. So really the outcomes will benefit everyone if those making the decisions look like those they're serving. So we articulate that with a mission statement that you stated about ensuring opportunities and maximum participation in transportation for those ones, and doing that through advocacy and training and networking opportunities.
So when people hear the word minority in COMTO, they shouldn't just think of Black people or people of color. They should think of a much wider and more diverse range of people with diverse abilities, talents, genders, etc.
That's exactly right. Any underrepresented group within transportation leadership is included in that word minority. And we know right now that means women, that means persons with disabilities, that means ethnic minorities, persons with diverse lived experience, different choices in life. So really that word minority, it is broad, right? But I know that just with our own bias, the first thing we think of when we think of minority is ethnic minority, but really it's all underrepresented groups within transportation leadership.
Beautiful. Now, you have been very busy since you hit the ground at COMTO in December of last year, and you have your national annual meeting coming up in just a couple of weeks. Tell us a little bit about that meeting and your hopes and aspirations for that event.
Thank you. We're so excited. Our national meeting and training conference is coming back in person after 2 years of doing everything inside this little box. We could not be so more excited about bringing everyone back together in person. And really, it's a gathering of transportation professionals representing all modes of transportation, all the different professions within the industry and career levels. And we're focusing on a theme of navigating the future, advancing transportation beyond disruption. We've all experienced the disruption of this pandemic. And I think everybody's ready to get out of it, see people in 3D. And the conference is going to be, our first back in person after a couple of years, but it's going to be condensed into a power pack 3 days of professional development sessions and workshops and forums where we can talk about how we move beyond the disruption and go into a hybrid world, taking the best from lessons learned and practical tools so we can all advance in our work in the industry. So really excited. My hope is that every single attendee is going to make a new connection. They're going to reconnect with someone in person, and they're going to come away with a practical tool, something, a nugget that they can utilize to move their work forward.
Well, April, I'm really excited for you and for your membership to be there in person. IBTTA had its first in-person annual meeting in 2 years last October in Anaheim, and it was a festival. I mean, it felt like a family reunion. So I have great hopes and aspirations for the COMTO community to come together. And I see Joy Dean, who runs the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority and is a board member of IBTTA and is one of the co-chairs of our task force on diversity, social, and racial inclusion. She says, I'm looking forward to attending and seeing you there. So that's great. We know that some of our participants today will be there in COMTO.
That is awesome. I look forward to connecting with you all, and registration is open till Monday, the 27th, coming up here. So we can put the link in the chat. If you haven't quite registered yet, please do so today. We would love to see you there. It'll definitely be one for the books.
Well, the link is in the chat, and we'll put it in a little bit later in the program so people can see the agenda and see how they can get involved.
Excellent.
April, I think a lot of people, when they look at equity, they think of it as a fluffy, nice to do thing, as opposed to something tangible and real world and measurable. Can you talk about the real tangible, measurable, and real world benefits of equity and diversity?
What a great topic. You're so right, Pat. The words equity, diversity, and inclusion, they're thrown around a lot. And sometimes it can be easy to kind of miss the tangible benefits of incorporating those core tenets into our work. And, we just talked with everyone on board about what equity means. We talked about equity meaning access. We heard other words about that in the chat. So really for transportation to be the great connector, connecting people to employment, experiences, life, opportunities, that requires access. And, for example, access in public transportation is not equitable. We know that. Experiences of different members of the community, it affects their approach to the use of different systems. Safety is a factor. A female's commuting trip is longer and more expensive due to safety concerns and other factors. We know that. And part of that challenge is the ones that are making the decisions may not reflect the users of the systems. That's from frequency to fare enforcement and everywhere in between. We need to make sure that ones with diverse lived experiences are included in the decision-making table that'll affect everyone. We know that equity in the recruiting and the professional development policies of organizations, it results in higher retention rates. and the attainment of highly qualified candidates. And we know that having diverse decision makers on boards and in leadership roles, it actually leads to profitable business and having projects that end on time and under budget. So we talk about tangible. There's all types of metrics that can support why it makes sense to focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion for those final outcomes, even the bottom line outcomes, but also the cultural outcomes as well.
April, when we spoke before a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned to me that you've had members come to you and say, you know, I want to do this equity thing, but it's hard. This is not an easy thing. This is hard. Can you talk about some of the ways in which COMTO helps its members to advance equity and diversity in its everyday programs?
You could not be more right, Pat. We did talk about that. You know, each organization, each agency, it's like a family, right? You've got your own set of problems, unique issues, challenges, and really the solutions are that way. They're unique. And really it has to do with looking at assessing, you know, existing inequities that might be embedded deep within an organizational culture, unintentional, but just a part of it. And so you're right, it is difficult, but over the years, COMTO has had the opportunity to partner with different organizations and agencies in this work. And it's so rewarding because we've been able to facilitate information gathering, dissemination of resources, and presenting of findings as a neutral third party. And in some cases, it means, you know, an organization might be looking to assess their culture. And if, you know, you, Pat, as the executive director were to ask, you may not get the responses that you'd hope because there may be some intimidation there to respond directly to Pat. Ooh, that's a little scary. But maybe if there's a third party organization asking, and then we're organizing the feedback in a way that can be given to the C-suite, that works well because individuals are encouraged to be honest about that feedback without the fear of reprisal. And the C-suite is able to kind of take that information and utilize it, looking at kind of what's salient throughout and work to foster inclusion within their culture. And in some cases, COMTO has partnered with agencies on community outreach and stakeholder engagement, facilitating meaningful communications on major projects that have the ability to kind of disrupt a lot of people, making sure everyone's voice is heard. So yes, the work is hard, but it is so rewarding when you can see those employee retention numbers skyrocket and successful recruitment efforts trying to fill those positions and you have no worries, having projects that are completed on time, on budget, the support of the community at large, all of that makes it well worth it.
April, so many of the people we talk to have taken a circuitous journey to get into transportation. Would you tell us a little bit about your journey into the transportation sector?
I am another one of those. My journey looked a lot more like this instead of like this. And I think in our brains, a lot of us think that our career journey, our leadership journey is going to be straightforward. And it absolutely is not. I don't know one person who's had a straightforward career journey. Everybody's journey is a little winding. And so mine, I started really in government affairs. I came to DC about 20 years ago. Don't do the math and try to figure out how old I am, but I came to DC about 20 years ago and was working at a lobbying firm, doing government affairs work. And then I transitioned into higher education advocacy, cause advocacy around workforce development and equity in the healthcare field. Looking at how we can diversify the healthcare workforce and provide access to care for ones who lived in rural communities and low-income communities. And so I was really happy in that work and I felt very fulfilled until I was contacted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to assist with a big initiative around the intersection between health and transportation. And we know there is a big intersection between health and transportation. And so that kind of led to a position leading an organization that was focused on transportation safety. And that work was with the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, alphabet soup in DC, you know how it is.
NHTSA, yeah.
NHTSA. And that work led to my work at WTS, focusing even further on equity in transportation, looking at the access for women's leadership in transportation. And then COMTO came calling when Brad Mims, the previous president and CEO, took a role at the FAA that opened up the presidency position. And here I am. So a winding road, but really making sure that your core values are always how you make decisions based on those core values. For me, it's believing in the purpose and the mission of the organization, making a difference. Those were kind of top on my list for decision making for career. So for me, I've ended up here and it completely makes sense. I feel like I'm in the right spot, which is a nice feeling.
Our guest today is April Rai. She's the president and CEO of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, COMTO. We are taking your questions and comments. Please put them in the chat using all panelists and attendees. And while we're waiting for your questions, April, let's talk a little bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which has significant investments in equity programs. Would you talk to us a little bit about that and how this, they call it a generational investment, is really going to help bring communities back together and try to restore some of the injustices that have been done in the past?
Yeah, the IIJA, it truly is a once in a generation investment. I mean, there's so many resources, so much money is being poured into our infrastructure, which is amazing. And, you know, a lot of folks ask, well, where is the equity programs in IIJA? And there's really one main one, and that's the Reconnecting Communities program. And I'll be honest, you know, $1 billion is not what $1 billion used to be. So $1 billion over the entire program is not really that much money. I think California spent $1 billion fighting fires last year. So it's a start, though. We're so happy to have something tangible and specific around equity programs in IIJA, and it's a start. So hopefully this will be the spark to additional programs focused on things like this. And we're really excited to see how this money is utilized for bringing back together communities that were separated by major highways and you know, other major infrastructure projects. So we are working with our agency partners and our organizational partners to kind of see how the funding can be utilized. And we'll be looking to kind of report on that so that we can share the amazing programs that have come as a result of these monies. Hopefully they can be duplicated. That's the goal. Further, we're also excited to see some equity policy embedded in the way programs are designed at the USDOT, offering different incentives and other things for those that are focused on low-income communities or support of historically underutilized businesses. That is amazing and very exciting. So we're really paying attention right now to the playing field, and we're trying to kind of note projects and programs that should be duplicated so that we can share that broadly, and hopefully it gets picked up and it becomes business as usual.
I want to pick up on that theme of duplication or replication of equity and connecting communities. Last week, Therese McMillan, who's the executive director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, was our guest, and she talked about an equity platform that she was implementing at LA Metro and also at MTC. And she said one of the keys is that it isn't just the responsibility of this small group, it's the responsibility of everybody in the organization to advance equity and diversity. Could you say a little bit more about that in your world?
I think that that's completely right. Equity is everyone's responsibility. And I think even from the smallest act of just listening and just allowing ones to express themselves fully, bringing their lived experience to the table, you know, sometimes that's a lot. Sometimes there's very big differences in the way people express themselves, their thought process, and how they bring that to the table at work. So everyone individually can just be ready to absorb that and appreciate it in the best way possible. That's a small thing we can individually do, but larger as organizations, if we start to embed some of this work in the way we do business, that's going to be the best outcome for the entire industry. So not only the way that we manage our recruiting and hiring processes, but also the way we manage our projects, making sure that we have diverse members of leadership at the table so that our projects are balanced and that we drive innovation by challenging one another to do things maybe in a different way or in a way that can satisfy the many instead of the few. Those are ways that each of us, no matter what our profession is in transportation, no matter what mode of transportation we work in, we can start to do to really make a difference.
We have a great question here from Joanne Story. She asks, what do you think are the most important indicators that a board should be tracking to review progress of their DEI goals?
Yeah, so I think those are going to be dependent on what your goals are, right? So what you're tracking, it should depend on what your major goals are. So if you're tracking engagement as a board, persons who are engaging in your programs or your initiatives, and then what those people look like, are those people representative of a broad perspective, or is it, very, very narrow? That would be an example, but what you should be tracking is going to depend on what you're paying attention to, what you're focused on, what your goals are. Right. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully that answers the question.
April, let's talk a little bit about values. You don't get to a position that you have, leadership in COMTO and WTS and elsewhere, without having some strong values that really have guided you and sort of channeled you in your life. Talk to us about some of the values that you hold dear and how they've affected you in your career development.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about that and kind of the way you make decisions for employment. But really, I had humble beginnings. Growing up, we really didn't have much materially, but we had so much in the love department. So we had a lot of love in our family, and we were taught to give back to the community. Volunteering was a part of our family. We did it every single month. And we were taught really by example that you should always bring your best to the table, even when no one's looking. So what I mean by that is, no matter what you are responsible for, or no matter who you are responsible to, you will literally bring your best to the table. Not because you have to, but because it simply is who you are. It's your brand. And that is some of the values that guide me today. They really came from my parents, and they also came from humble beginnings. I think even today, my mother or father don't really understand what I do. They're proud of me in general. They're just very proud. They don't really get it, but they know me. And so I can still come to them with, a decision or something I'm pondering, and they can still give amazing advice just with those core values, and helping me to use those to guide me.
April, in your introductory remarks, you said a little bit about having decision makers in transportation represent or reflect the communities that they serve. Could you develop that idea a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think it's really simple. When you have ones at the decision-making table who have had diverse lived experience, then they can help to move policies and programs in a direction that can best assist those that are utilizing systems. So if you are going to create a new highway, or if you're going to maybe make a new bus route, have you ever taken the bus? Have you ever driven on the highway? Do you know what traffic is like in that area at that time? Do you know what it's like to try and catch a bus at this intersection at this time of the day? Have you ever taken public transportation with a stroller, or with crutches, or with a wheelchair? Once again, having diverse decision makers at the table, no matter what the project is, it's going to help to make sure that it has the best outcomes for those who utilize those services or that product. So that's really what it is. Having diverse decision makers at the table, it makes sense. It makes bottom line sense. It makes cultural sense. It makes project sense. It pushes innovation, and it really makes for the best outcomes.
Beautiful, beautiful. April, let's talk a little bit about the cooperation between COMTO and IBTTA. Brad Mims and I, your predecessor, and I signed a memorandum of understanding back in 2020 that talked about some of the things that we're going to do to work together. I wonder if you would reflect on some of those things and how we're already advancing our goals to work together.
Absolutely. I'm here today, which is a direct result of Pat initiating a discussion so that we could refresh our memories on what we said we would do and how we're doing in that department. We had a great one-on-one meeting, and we talked about some tangible ways that we can start to move the partnership forward a little deeper than just that public promise to partner, an MOU agreement.
Right.
Therefore, I am here today to support this amazing series. And in addition, we've talked a little bit about the support of scholarship diversification. I know that IBTTA has an amazing scholarship that is presented each year, and COMTO has been diligently working to improve our relationships with colleges and universities. So what a wonderful partnership. We can utilize some of those existing relationships with colleges and universities, including historically Black colleges and universities, to have a diverse applicant pool for scholarships that are being offered, as well as engaging in some specific diversity and equity work that each of our organizations are going to be engaging in.
April, I'm also grateful that you extended an invitation to me to come speak and meet with your board of directors when you're meeting in Fort Lauderdale at your national meeting. And maybe you could take a couple of seconds to promote that meeting and tell people how they can get more involved in COMTO.
So once again, it's going to be a premier gathering of transportation professionals of all different modes of transportation, representing all different professions and levels of their career, from scholarship recipients who are just entering into the industry to emerging leaders who have a whole forum to talk about mentoring and professional development, to our C-suite and our CEO summit. Everyone, there's something for everyone. So we really hope that you may consider attending. And everyone is invited to become a part of COMTO. COMTO is a place where you can showcase your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion in transportation. And it doesn't matter the color of your skin or your background or your preferences or anything. Everyone is welcome at COMTO. And there's some amazing ways that you can be directly involved with improving the industry with an equity lens. So if you want any more information, go to comtonational.org, reach out to me directly. Pat has my information. I would love to talk to you about it.
Beautiful. April, there's another question in here about underlying bias being a steep challenge to overcome. I know we don't have a lot of time, but maybe you could give us just a couple of reflections on overcoming bias.
Yeah, I think there's different types of bias that we encounter, right? And some of those biases are unintentional, and they just come from maybe perceptions or perceived ideas about a person or about a culture or a background. And the first step is kind of recognizing that you have it. You have bias. That's the first step. And once you realize that, you can kind of stop yourself and challenge yourself to rethink how you are assuming a person will respond or their background or what they will say. You can stop yourself and force yourself to think and look at that individual as an individual. There's a lot of assumptions that we make about people and about what they think, what they like, what they love. We can just take everyone as an individual instead of utilizing our unconscious bias to help us make decisions. So it can be simple things, but I think the first step is just recognizing that you have it, even if it's unintentional. We all have a little bias based on everything we see on the media and our own lived experience, but just know that there's an exception to every rule.
It's really about being intentional and not being unintentional, isn't it? It's
That's
about
exactly right.
thinking and not throwing people into a group based on some broad generalization we have in our minds.
That's exactly right.
April, I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to come back to you for some final words of wisdom. Well, everybody, don't forget to complete the survey at the end of today's program. We'd love to get your feedback. We have several upcoming events. Later this week in Cleveland is the Maintenance, Engineering, and Roadway Operations Workshop that is preceded by the 2023 Conference Planning Meeting and the annual service project supporting the Boys and Girls Clubs of Northeast Ohio. On July 7th, we have our book club. The next book discussion is focusing on the book Biased, Overcoming Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do by Jennifer Eberhardt. It happens on July 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And on July 13th, we are having a safe space discussion, very similar to the safe space discussions we had in Anaheim and Orlando, except this one will be virtual and on Zoom. IBTTA's annual meeting is coming up in September in Austin, and our global summit in Dublin happens in October. Visit the IBTTA website for details on all our upcoming events. Well, April, what final words of wisdom do you have before we sign off today?
I would just say that equity, diversity, and inclusion make sense culturally, financially, and practically. And we all have a part to play, and every effort makes a difference.
April, thank you so much for being our guest today on Cafe IBTTA. It's been wonderful having you here. And to all our viewers, be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, April.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everybody.
much.